Well, that introduction was just full of lies. We're up to 7 now. That's an outdated bio. And I don't think I brought a shot on the arm to anybody, but I'm very, very blessed to be out in the sticks where I am serving these 2 parishes and able to do this work for Synod as well. And that's actually how I'm going to start my presentation. I am going to talk, as promised, in the 26 minutes we have together, about putting stewardship, framing that within the theological task of a pastor in his parish. But I did want to talk about kind of, how I came to be here, because that's part of that story. Right out of seminary, I served a congregation in the suburbs of Chicago as an assistant while I worked on a PhD, which did not happen as I found full-time dad and full-time church and part-time grad student didn't work together too well. So put my name on a call list and ended up in these 2 parishes in southern Illinois. We arrived there in December of 2005, and come to find out that the congregation for I don't know how many years previously had from time to time, perhaps more months than not, been dipping into an equity line of credit with a local bank to make ends meet. And in April of 2006, so I've been there less than half a year, the bank calls the trustees and says, no more. This needs to be paid down. And that's how I got into stewardship. Not by choice. As you can tell from the accurate parts of the bio, I am much more a bookish person. I like to be in the classics. I enjoy writing. I also enjoy being outside. I like to hunt and to hike. I did not get into the ministry because they turned down my application for fundraiser with the Red Cross. And I did not get in this to raise money. But here I was as a pastor, as a young pastor, in a place I was excited to be at, really faced with what seemed to be an impossible task of how do we manage this? And what was worse was I just didn't know how this applied to me as a preacher. I just felt very inadequate in the face of this financial difficulty. And so I kind of had to go back to square one. What is my job as a pastor? How does this fit in? Can I find a place for this? And what I did was I went back to my ordination vows. And if you haven't looked at those in a while, they're actually really interesting. Of course, the day that you get ordained, it's a big day. You're nervous. If you're in the congregation, you're not really paying attention to what his vows are. You're thinking about the reception to be held afterwards and what's this guy going to be like and checking out his family. And so get a hold of the ordination vows. They're very interesting, both in what's there and what we think is there that's not there. Well, we only promise to do 9 things. The list starts with that we preachers promise to live a godly life. Oh, well, check that off the list. That's a piece of cake. Live a godly life. And then, you're supposed to pray for those under your care. Supposed to teach, both young and old, visit the sick. And we're to teach, and specifically in teaching, that the last vow, actually, gets more specific on the teaching. It says that we're supposed to encourage the people of God in godly living and a lively faith in Christ. So they actually make us promise to preach the whole counsel of God in such a way that we don't neglect godly living. The teaching of the law, the teaching of the third use of the law. And in this, as I begin to now try to figure out, what is my job as a preacher in this specific situation where we've got a financial difficulty, I kind of felt like I was able to get my feet. This is where the topics of stewardship, this is where they fell in the pastoral task. Because, the way that I grew up, hearing about stewardship growing up, I didn't pay a lot of attention to it. And probably if you would ask me what stewardship, I'd have said something I think that's time, talent, and treasures. I think I've heard of that. And that was about it. But now, where I could see this fits into my job as the preacher and teacher of the whole counsel of God, and specifically in the area of teaching people to, what does it mean to live a godly life that flows forth from a lively faith in Christ, that I had a place to start. And so from there, I began, in one way or another, to piece together what we would do. And so we took about a year off we dedicated a year in the teaching of the church and Bible class and newsletters and special meetings with parish leaders in simply asking the question from the Scriptures. What do the Scriptures have to say about our finances, about our duties? And as the more I dug into that, I found there's an even better, a more specific way of thinking about this in Lutheran theology, because even that topic, okay, how do you live a godly life? Or what's sanctification? Even that's almost too much to swallow. How does that come together? And I found the answer in Luther's doctrine of vocation, of the holy callings that each one of us have in our life. And as I began to put all that together, the whole process of stewardship, those aspects of the parish's life began to fit into a wider and greater picture, began to be part of a whole rather than a thing unto itself. Because I know that as studying the seminary and in my first years in the ministry, I did not like the idea of stewardship. I didn't like the idea of preaching about money or fundraising, and that is how I viewed it. And so it wasn't something, again, that I came to in any kind of voluntary way. But once I found where stewardship could be placed in the wider pastoral task of leading a congregation into godly living, and then even more specifically, as I could see where the doctrine of vocation was really the Lutheran key to understanding sanctification and making that something that you could wrap your mind around, then we had something to talk about. Because, the Lutheran Reformation can be viewed in many different ways, as a Reformation in worship, as a Reformation in the doctrine of justification. But a big part of the Reformation is a revolt against monasticism. When I talk about this with congregations, when I'm invited to speak at that level, I usually start off with Jesus and the young rich man who comes to him and says, what must I do to inherit eternal life? And Jesus says, no problem, keep the second table of the law. And the guy says, oh, well, no problem, I've done that from the beginning. And Jesus looks at him and loves him, the text says. He's not angry with him. He's a man who's misunderstood the depth of the law. And so Jesus gives him the first table of the law. Well, then go, sell all you have, give it to the poor, and come follow me. So we read this. And then I'll ask the congregation, usually I'm with a group of lay leaders, and I'll ask them, okay, this statement from Jesus, go sell all you have, give it to the poor, come follow me, is that directed at you? Because, of course, not everything in the Bible is directed equally at you in the same way, right? I mean, God didn't tell you to go into Canaan and kill all the Philistines. That's not your job. That's not directed at you. Or the old joke about the guy who he can't decide if he should take the job in the next city over, and he's maybe not the world's best Christian. And so he gets out his Bible and he says, Lord, please direct me. And he opens up the Bible and closes his eyes and puts his finger down, and it says, and Judas went out and hanged himself. No, that's not what we're after. And so go, sell all you have, give it to the poor, come follow me. Is that directed at you? Is that saying for you? And around the table, I'll always get some wonderful, pious layperson who will say, well, yeah, and they'll try to spiritualize it, right? Like, everything we have belongs to God. He wants everything. And that's true. But it kind of gets around the question, doesn't it? Because I don't think Jesus would have been satisfied with the rich young man if he'd said, well, in my heart, I've already done that. No, Jesus is saying, no, not in your heart. In real life, go sell all that you have, give it to the poor, and follow me. And so we'll banter around this for a while. And finally, some crusty old Lutheran farmer or a small businessman will just cross his arms and say, no. God doesn't want me to do that. And that's the right answer. But what's interesting is why? Why is that the right answer? Why has not God called you to go give away all that you have to the poor and go follow Jesus? Well, because what would happen if you did? If you're that small business owner, what happens to your employees? If you're the provider for your family, what happens to your family? If you are that crusty old farmer and you give up your vocation, we don't eat. And this is a huge distinction in the Lutheran Reformation, a recapturing of a central teaching of the Scriptures, because, of course, there are people who do believe that the best way to live your Christian life is to follow that command, to go sell all that you have, give to the poor, and go follow Jesus. And we call those people monks and nuns, right? Yeah, we call them monks and nuns. And so monasticism, it finds its answer in Lutheranism and the doctrine of vocation, that you don't have to run away from the world to find a holy calling, that God has already given you a holy calling. He's given you at least 3 holy callings: in your family, in your home, in your church, and in your society at large. And in those expanding, those concentric circles, home, church, and world. Everybody's first born into a family, and then you're baptized into a church, and then you learn to grow into the rest of society. In each one of those places, you have a vocation. And now you can see how, if we begin talking there, that stewardship is actually very natural. Because each one of those vocations is making a claim on you. And God has given you responsibilities and duties to perform in each one of those vocations, in your home, in your church, in your society. So this allows us to put stewardship in a context. It allows me as a preacher to put stewardship in a wider theological context. It allows me to approach it in a way that's not artificial, that's not foreign to my theology as a Lutheran and foreign to how I usually care for my people. So that's how I approached it, and we began to work through this as a parish. And you can read all about it in the book that Bishop Steckles mentioned, Stewardship Under the Cross. That's now available as a PDF for free at lcms.org/stewardship. If you want a hard copy, you do have to buy a hard copy. They won't give those away for free. You can get those at lulu.com, but you can get the PDF for free at the Synod's website. So that leads me to talk a little bit about so that's my teaser trailer for the book and for how you might approach stewardship in your congregation, whether you come today as a lay leader or as a preacher. But from there, so our congregation, we found our way through that crisis by the grace of God, and I published that book largely, really, for friends in the ministry who were undergoing the same thing, so they wouldn't have to reinvent the wheel. Well, then the stewardship guy left his position at the IC to go to Concordia Seminary in St. Louis. His name is Wayne Nallhoff, and he's now running out of the seminary's campus the Center for Stewardship, which is another great place to go for resources. We're very blessed to have Wayne's decades of experience in this field still working for the church in that field. But he walked away from the full-time position at the IC to take up that full-time position. And so I was contacted, I think because of the book, and would you apply for this position? And I said, no, I'm not going to leave the parish. I'm not going to go work 9 to 5 as a suit in St. Louis. Nothing sounds less appealing to me. And he said, okay. And I get a call about a month later, and the guy looking to hire for this position says, I talked about 4 or 5 other guys, and they all told me the same thing. Maybe we should have lunch. And so how it has shaken out is that I remain in the parish as coordinator for stewardship, and Nathan Metter remains in a parish in Sheboygan as assistant coordinator, and we kind of split these duties, and we have a full-time secretary there in St. Louis holding down the fort. What this means is that Nathan and I still live this day to day in a way that is anything but abstract. I'm still dealing with two rural congregations in an area of the country whose population is steady to declining, if that rings a bell with any of you. Nathan is still in a big church in an area of society that's not declining but not growing too great. He's got a huge staff, big school, if that rings a bell for others of you. And so we're both in the thick of it in the parish life on a day-to-day basis. And that is how we continue to drive the things we produce out of the stewardship ministry. And we do basically three things. We do produce resources that you can use and find on the website at lcms.org/stewardship. We do monthly and weekly items that you can do, newsletter articles and bulletin blurbs that are keyed to either lectionary, either the 1-year or the 3-year lectionaries, to keep stewardship in front of your people's eyes. We've done a whole new A to Z stewardship resource guide that has essays on the theology of stewardship, on the brass tacks of if you haven't done a stewardship focus, how are you going to do that for the first time in your parish? So we produce resources. We also do training. So last spring, we brought, actually I think we ended up with like 5 people from the English district at our conference last year, and we've got 2 of them coming back this year for more focused training. And the idea there is to raise up new stewardship leaders to have more hands on deck so that if you want to do a stewardship focus in your congregation, you'll have somebody maybe that you will know better in your district who will tell you what's out there. So for example, some of our very important partners you've already heard from, LCEF and Foundation, they'll be there helping to train these folks. I believe the 2 guys from English District are Ryan Beffrey and Dave Peterson. They'll be coming in to St. Louis to hear about what's out there in stewardship and to be available to you as a Stewardship Sunday preacher and so forth. So we do training. And then Nathan and I get around to events like this or pastors' conferences to do speaking. What we're most interested in doing, and this is especially something that probably fits very well with the way the English district is set up, we'd like to get out to do more regional events where we have both pastor and lay leaders together. We call that workshop our Philippians workshop. So if the book of Philippians begins with Paul as the bishop speaking to the preachers and the deacons and the lay people at Philippi. Every order in the church is referred to in that book, and specifically dealing with funding the church's mission, because as St. Paul says to the Philippians, it was they alone who partnered with him in the gospel in those early years. So a Philippians workshop, if you're interested in that, if you're in a locale that could host that, we would be very interested in coming out your way and talking to a gathering of pastors with their lay leadership to talk in very specific ways about how you can view stewardship in your local ministry. In my last few minutes, I do want to talk about something that is also we've kind of taken under our wing in the stewardship office, and we spoke about this at lunch with your stewardship committee, and this is usually what I use at the end of one of my presentations to get everybody's attention. Yeah, it's no secret. It's been kind of bandied about here in this convention already that the Missouri Synod is experiencing demographic decline, right? And so we in stewardship have taken that under our wing, and we're using our resources to study this issue. And we've brought in 2 different demographers and researchers to take a look at the Synod. That's been fascinating. One of them is a Lutheran from the ELS. He's the head of the history department at Bethany. And the other one does not come from a Lutheran background. He's kind of a high-powered research fellow at the University of Alabama. And it's fascinating to look at how they approached and look at the Missouri Synod and who we are and where we're headed. And we'll give you one stat from the first round of demographics. The birth rate in the Missouri Synod in 2010 is, what do you think? What percentage of the birth rate in 1950? 1/4, 1/4. We baptized about 80,000 kids in 1950. We baptized about 20,000 in 2010. Okay. Now, I agree with your bishop-to-be. We need to view this as an opportunity and as something to spur us on to further ministry and to think about how we talk about things, not only how we talk about evangelism, but how we talk about family life, especially in our culture where the family is being attacked and so forth. But we'll have a lot more to say to that. You can look for reports from our office once we get all these numbers in. It's going to be fascinating. But why we are the ones at the IC who first noticed this is because this is what Nathan and I kept hearing time and again as we went around and talked to district leaders and lay leaders out there in the parish, and that is this is the next thing on the horizon for funding ministry, right? You have now two generations, the builders and the boomers, who are populating our churches and filling our offering plates. And the two generations behind them, the Gen Xers and the millennials, are smaller just by math. That is, if you got the same percentage of those two generations in your churches as you have of the builders and boomers, your church would still be shrinking because those generations are smaller, right? Math is a first article gift. You cannot send it away by fond wishing. So this is another impetus to all of us to really realize that now is the time. We have a window of opportunity where we still have that wonderful leadership in those two generations. We have a wonderful opportunity to build for future ministry. When we were talking at lunch, Carrie mentioned that he's spoken to several of the congregations that he has done interim work for and has pointed out to them, you're living on the legacy of your fathers, right? Any of us who go to a church where there's no mortgage payment are living on the legacy of our fathers, right? That the building's bought and paid for. That's a blessing that they handed down to us. So the question is, as we transition from these two generations to the next two generations, we need to leave that patrimony so that the church can transition to what's going to be a very different world because of those simple facts of math for the synod in the next 20 and 30 years. So that's what we're doing at the district, at the synodical level in stewardship, both dealing with the theology of stewardship and brass tacks of stewardship, and trying to look at this bigger picture. And we're calling that whole project generational generosity. How does one generation follow another in the Lord for the benefit of his church? My email address is, just like all the LCMS bureaucrat email addresses, is heath.curtis@lcms.org. If you have any questions, you want to talk, you want to set up one of these Philippians events in your neck of the woods, let me know, and just let me know how else I may be of benefit to your ministry. And I officially will yield the last 120 seconds of my time.